In the dusty mining town of Oakhaven, Thorn was a ghost in tattered buckskin. People called him the beggar of the peaks. They said he had nothing to his name but a rusted knife and a hollow stare. When Isabel, a woman the town treated like a servant, was forced into a marriage of debt, no one expected the beggar to speak up. They laughed when she took his hand. They thought she was trading one prison for a slow death in the cold. But Thorn wasn't leading her to a shack. He was leading her to a secret, hidden above the eagles, a kingdom in the clouds that would change everything she knew about survival, wealth, and the human heart.
Welcome back to Rescued by the Ridge. If you find peace in the stories of the Old West and the strength of those who braved the wild, please subscribe and hit the bell. Your support helps us keep these forgotten tales of redemption alive. Now, let us step into the dust of 1874.
The air in Oakhaven didn't smell like hope. It smelled of wet coal, cheap whiskey, and the desperation of men digging for gold that wasn't there. Isabel stood on the porch of the general store, her fingers red from scrubbing floors that never stayed clean. Her uncle, a man named Barnaby, who had gambled away his pride and his coin, wouldn't look her in the eye. In those days, life on the frontier was harsh. For a woman without a father or a husband, survival often depended on social arrangements. These were informal agreements where a man would pay a family's debts in exchange for a wife to run his home. It was a cold, practical world. Today, Barnaby was looking to settle his tab with the local saloon owner, a man with teeth like yellowed piano keys. "She's a hard worker," Barnaby muttered to the crowd. He was trying to sell a life he didn't own. Isabel looked at her boots. She felt like a piece of livestock. The townspeople gathered, whispering and smirking. They saw her as a spinster, a woman whose time had passed. Then the crowd parted. A man walked through the mud. He didn't ride a horse. He didn't wear a polished suit. This was Thorn. His hair was a wild thicket, and his clothes were patched with deer hide and old canvas. He smelled of pine needles and wood smoke. To the people of Oakhaven, he was a failure. He didn't mine for gold. He didn't trade in land. He just lived up there in the shadows of the great ridge. The saloon owner laughed. "You lost, beggar? This is a meeting for men with pockets, not scavengers." Thorn didn't say a word. He reached into a small, weathered pouch at his hip. He pulled out a single nugget. It wasn't gold. It was silver, but it was the size of a bird's egg and pure as moonlight. The crowd went silent. Silver of that quality hadn't been seen in these parts for decades. He held it out to Barnaby. His voice was deep, like the grinding of stones in a riverbed. "The debt is paid. She comes with me." Barnaby snatched the silver. The saloon owner spat in the dirt, but he couldn't match that kind of wealth. Isabel looked at Thorn. His eyes weren't cold, they were vast. "I have no house in the valley," Thorn said to her, loud enough for the judgmental town to hear. "I have no bed of feathers. I have only the trail. Do you choose the trail?" Isabel looked at the gray, suffocating town. Then she looked at the towering blue peaks of the ridge. She took his hand. It was calloused and warm. "I choose the trail," she whispered. Without a suitcase, without a goodbye, Thorn turned toward the mountains. Isabel followed him, her heart hammering against her ribs. As the sun began to dip, the town disappeared behind the first line of pines. But as the shadows grew long, Thorn stopped at the base of a cliff that looked impossible to climb. He turned to her and handed her a pair of sturdy leather wraps for her shoes. "The world you know ends here. From this moment on, you must forget how to walk and learn how to climb."
The leather wraps Thorn handed Isabel were strange. They weren't like the stiff, formal shoes of the town. They were soft, made of thick elk hide, designed to feel the ground rather than fight it. As she bound them over her worn boots, Thorn watched her with a steady, unblinking gaze. He wasn't rushing her.
In the mountains, haste was a recipe for a broken spirit. In the valley, people walk with their heads down, Thorn said, his voice blending with the wind in the needles. Up here, you must move like the mountain lion. Every toe has a purpose. They began the ascent. The trail, if you could even call it that, was a narrow ribbon of shale and roots. To the people of Oakhaven, this land was wasteland. It was ground that couldn't be farmed and rocks that held no obvious gold. But as Isabel climbed, she noticed Thorn was reading the world like a book. He stopped near a small bubbling spring and knelt. He didn't just drink, he observed. He pointed to the way the water flowed around a specific cluster of moss. If the moss is bright and thick, the water is filtered by the stone. If it is dark and slimy, you keep walking. Your life depends on what you put inside your body. This was the first lesson of the ridge. Survival isn't about strength, it's about observation. As the light faded into a deep bruised purple, the temperature plummeted. This is a phenomenon known as an adiabatic rapse rate. For every 1,000 feet they climbed, the air grew significantly colder. Isabel began to shiver. Her thin cotton dress, once a symbol of her modesty in town, was now a dangerous liability. Cotton holds moisture against the skin, stealing body heat. Thorn reached into his pack and pulled out a heavy, hand-woven wool serape. It smelled of wood smoke and cedar. "Wool is the only friend you have when the clouds descend," he whispered. "It stays warm even when it's wet. Wrap it tight." They didn't build a fire that night. Thorn explained that a fire would draw the eyes of the desperate men from the valley who might follow the scent of silver. Instead, he showed her how to find a dry bed, a hollow beneath a fallen hemlock tree where the needles had stayed dry for years. They sat together in the hollow, the vastness of the wilderness pressing in. It was terrifying, yet for the first time in years, no one was shouting at her. No one was demanding she scrub a floor. "Why did you buy my freedom, Thorn? You don't even know me." Thorn stayed silent for a long time. The only sound was the distant hoot of an owl. "I didn't buy a person, Isabel. I paid a debt so a soul could breathe. But the mountain doesn't give anything for free. Tomorrow, the real climbing begins." He looked up at the stars, which seemed to be close enough to touch. He seemed to be looking for a specific alignment. His brow furrowed. He saw something in the sky, a ring around the moon that made his posture stiffen. "Sleep now," he said, his voice tight. "The great ridge is closing its gates. We have to reach the pass before the white ghost finds us."
The ring around the moon hadn't lied. By dawn, the sky was the color of a tarnished spoon. The air felt heavy, charged with the static of an approaching front. Thorn didn't wait for the sun to clear the peaks. He woke Isabel with a gentle tap on her shoulder, pressing a small handful of dried berries and smoked trout into her hand. "Eat while we move," he commanded. "The air is turning. We need to reach the high timber before the wind finds its teeth." As they pushed upward, the landscape shifted. The lush greens of the lower slopes gave way to the rugged, twisted world of the subalpine zone. Here the trees were smaller, bent into strange shapes by years of unrelenting wind. Thorn called them Krummholz, a German word meaning crooked wood. "Look at the trees, Isabel," Thorn said, pausing to catch his breath. "They tell you everything about the world you're entering. See how they only have branches on one side? That side points away from the prevailing winter storms. If you ever get lost in the mist, the trees are your compass." Isabel marveled at how Thorn moved. He didn't fight the mountain. He flowed with it. He showed her how to step on the uphill side of rocks to avoid slipping, and how to use a rest step, a technique where you lock your trailing leg for a split second on every stride to give your muscles a micro break. "Survival isn't about being the strongest," he explained as they navigated a field of loose scree. "It's about being the most efficient. A man who runs up a mountain will die at the top. A man who leans into the mountain will live to see the other side. By midday, the white ghost, the thick, blinding mountain fog, began to roll in. It swallowed the valley below, erasing Oakhaven as if it had never existed. Suddenly, Isabel felt a pang of hunger that made her dizzy. She reached for a bright red berry on a nearby bush, but Thorn's hand shot out, catching her wrist. "Stop," he said firmly. "In the wild, beauty is often a warning. Those are baneberries. Just a few can stop a man's heart. Never put anything in your mouth unless you've seen the birds eat it first, and even then, be certain." He reached into the soil near a damp rock and pulled up a small leafy plant with a yellow flower. He cleaned the root and handed it to her. "This is yellow avalanche lily. The corms are sweet like chestnuts. They will give you the sugar your blood needs for the climb." Isabel chewed the root. It was earthy and sustaining. She looked at Thorn, seeing past the tattered buckskin. He wasn't a beggar. He was a librarian of the forest, a man who had memorized 1,000 life-saving secrets. Just as she began to feel a sense of confidence, the wind let out a low, mournful howl. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in a heartbeat. The first flake of snow landed on Isabel's nose, but it wasn't soft. It was hard, like a grain of sand. Thorn looked up at the granite wall ahead. The path narrowed to a ledge barely wider than a man's shoulders. "The gate is closing," he whispered. "We have to climb the chimney now, or we don't climb at all."
The chimney was a vertical crack in the granite face, a narrow throat of stone that seemed to lead straight into the belly of the clouds. The wind was no longer a howl. It was a physical weight, pushing against them with invisible hands. The snow began to fall in earnest, swirling in dizzying patterns that threatened to steal Isabel's balance. "Don't look at the summit," Thorn shouted over the gale, "and don't look at the valley. Look only at the 3 feet of rock in front of your face. That is your entire world now." This was a lesson in psychological survival. In times of extreme stress, the human brain can become overwhelmed by the big picture. By narrowing her focus, Isabel was able to suppress the rising panic in her chest. She watched where Thorn placed his hands, mimicking his grip on the cold, wet stone. Halfway up the crevice, the white ghost fully descended. Visibility dropped to less than 5 feet. They were suspended in a world of gray nothingness. Suddenly, the wind shifted, and a terrifying roar echoed from the peaks above. It wasn't an animal. It was the sound of a slough, a small, localized snowslide. Thorn immediately pulled Isabel into a shallow alcove in the rock. "Stay flat," he commanded. As they huddled together, Thorn explained the science of the mountain. "The snow isn't just falling, it's loading. When the wind blows this hard, it creates wind slabs on the leeward side of the ridges. It's like a loaded spring. One wrong vibration and the whole slope comes down." The slide passed, a river of white powder cascading just feet from their shelter. They were safe, but they were trapped. The storm was growing too violent to continue the ascent, and the light was dying. "We can't make the summit tonight," Thorn said, his expression grim. "We have to go to ground." He didn't panic. Instead, he led her to a cluster of fallen boulders and began digging. He wasn't looking for a cave. He was making one. Using a flat stone, he hollowed out a space in a deep snowdrift on the downwind side of a rock. "A snow cave," he explained, "is the warmest place on a frozen mountain. Once we're inside, the snow acts as an insulator. Our own body heat will raise the temperature to nearly freezing, even if it's 20 below outside." He lined the floor with evergreen boughs he had gathered earlier, creating a barrier between their bodies and the frozen earth. This was the R value of survival, the measure of thermal resistance. Without that layer of air trapped in the branches, the ground would sap their heat in minutes. Inside the cramped white silence of the snow cave, the roar of the storm became a muffled hum. Thorn pulled a small candle from his pack and lit it. The tiny flame cast a golden glow on the icy walls. "Isabel," Thorn said softly, his eyes reflecting the light. "In town, you were invisible because you had no money. Here, you are alive because you have courage. Which wealth do you prefer?" Before she could answer, a strange, rhythmic thumping started on the roof of their cave. Something was out there, circling their shelter in the dark.
The thumping on the snow roof was rhythmic and heavy. Isabel froze, her breath catching in her throat. In the flickering candlelight, she saw Thorn's hand move, not to a weapon, but to his pack. He pulled out a small bundle of dried lavender and sage. "Don't move," he whispered. "It's a mountain goat. They seek the salt in our sweat and the shelter of the rocks, just like we do. If you startle him, he'll cave in our ceiling." He reached up and gently poked a small hole in the snow roof with a stick. This was for ventilation, to prevent carbon dioxide buildup and to let the scent of the herbs drift out. Animals of the high crags have a sense of smell 1,000 times stronger than ours. This tells him we are peaceful neighbors, not predators. Eventually, the thumping stopped as the creature settled on the leeward side of their rock. The danger had passed, but as the night deepened, a new challenge arrived: the big sleep. When the body grows cold, it tries to shut down. Thorn kept Isabel awake by telling her the history of the stars, explaining how the North Star was the only constant for a traveler, a fixed point in a spinning world. By morning, the storm had scoured the sky clean. The world was a blinding, brilliant white. They crawled out of their burrow into air so thin it felt like drinking ice water. "The final push," Thorn said, pointing to a narrow bridge of stone and ice that connected their peak to the next. "This is the razor's edge." In geological terms, this was an arête, a thin ridge of rock formed by glaciers eroding two parallel valleys. It was beautiful and terrifying. To cross it, they had to navigate verglas, a thin coating of clear ice that forms when meltwater freezes overnight. "Look for the grit," Thorn instructed. "The wind blows tiny particles of granite onto the ice. That grit is your sandpaper. It's the only thing that will give your boots purchase." He tied a sturdy hemp rope around his waist and then around Isabel's. "We move as one. If I slip, you drop your weight to the opposite side of the ridge. If you slip, I do the same. This is the law of the rope. We are responsible for the life we are tied to." Step by agonizing step, they shuffled across the precipice. The wind tried to pull them into the abyss, but Isabel didn't look down. She watched the grit. She watched Thorn's steady heels. Her lungs burned from the altitude, a condition known as hypoxia, where the lack of oxygen makes every movement feel like lifting lead. Just as they reached the far side, the sun hit the peak at a perfect angle. For a second, the entire mountain seemed to catch fire with golden light. But Thorn didn't stop to admire the view. He hurried her toward a massive, dark opening in the rock face that looked like a giant's mouth. "Hurry," he urged. "The pressure is dropping again. The mountain doesn't like visitors who linger on her doorstep." As they stepped into the cavern, the wind vanished. But as Isabel's eyes adjusted to the gloom, she realized they weren't in a cave at all. They were standing at the entrance of a massive hidden tunnel, and at the end of it, she could see a glimmer of green that shouldn't exist this high in the world.
The tunnel was a natural windpipe, carved over millennia by the relentless breath of the high altitudes. As Isabel followed Thorn through the gloom, the air changed. It lost its biting, icy edge and took on a scent that made her heart ache, the smell of damp earth and ripening berries. It felt impossible. They were nearly 2 miles above the sea, where nothing should grow but lichen and moss. As they emerged from the far end of the tunnel, the path opened onto a narrow shelf of rock, but they weren't alone. Blocking the only way forward was a massive grizzly bear. She was a silver-tipped titan, her fur shimmering like the frost they had just escaped. She stood over a patch of alpine clover, her head swinging low. To a townsperson, this would be a moment for a rifle,
But Thorn stood perfectly still, his hands open and down at his sides. "Quiet," he breathed. "Do not run. If you run, you are prey. If you stand your ground, you are a mountain." He began to speak to the bear in a low, monotonous hum. This is a technique used by experienced woodsmen to identify themselves as human, a non-threatening presence, rather than a silent, stalking predator. Thorn explained the science of the encounter in a whisper. "Bears have poor eyesight, but an incredible sense of smell. She knows we are here. We just have to show her we don't want her food or her space." The bear huffed, a sound like a bellows. She stood on her hind legs, towering nearly 9 feet tall. Isabel felt the urge to scream, but she remembered Thorn's lesson on the razor's edge. She focused on her breathing. "She's bluffing," Thorn whispered. "She's testing our resolve. See how her ears are forward? She's curious, not angry. If they were pinned back, we'd be in trouble." Instead of challenging the animal, Thorn slowly began to back away, motioning for Isabel to do the same. They weren't retreating in fear, they were showing ecological respect. In the wild, every calorie a bear spends on a fight is a calorie it needs for hibernation. By moving away, they were offering the bear a negotiated peace. They took a long, grueling detour, climbing over a series of jagged boulders to bypass the bear's meadow. It added an hour to their journey and pushed Isabel's endurance to the breaking point. Her legs felt like they were made of lead, and the thin air made her vision swim with silver spots. "Why didn't we just scare her off?" Isabel panted, leaning against a rock. Thorn looked back at the bear, which had settled back down to graze. "This is her kingdom, Isabel. We are just the guests. If you want to live in the clouds, you have to learn that you aren't the master of everything you see." As they emerged from the far end of the tunnel, the white ghost fog returned, thicker than ever. It swallowed Thorn just a few feet ahead of her. Isabel reached out, panicked, but her hand met only cold mist. "Thorn!" she called out. His voice came back, but it sounded strange, echoing, as if he were speaking from inside a great hall. "Step forward, Isabel, but don't trust your eyes. Trust the warmth." Isabel stepped into the white void. The world of rock and sky vanished, replaced by a damp, clinging blanket of fog. It was a cloud forest effect, where moisture from the valley is pushed up the mountain and trapped against the peaks. In the silence, her own heartbeat sounded like a drum. She couldn't see her own feet, but as she moved, the air didn't feel like the freezing bite of the summit. It felt soft. "Follow the moss, Isabel," Thorn's voice floated through the gray. "The rocks here have a face and a back. The moss grows where the steam touches the stone." This was the mystery of the thermal inversion. While the rest of the mountain was locked in a seasonal freeze, certain pockets of the ridge were heated by deep subterranean volcanic activity. Thorn showed her how to navigate by touch. He explained that in a whiteout, the human inner ear can fail, leading to vertigo. To stay upright, she had to keep her center of gravity low and feel for the temperature changes against her skin. "The town thinks I am a beggar because I don't bring down gold," Thorn's voice floated through the gray. "But gold is just a heavy rock. It can't cook your food or keep your blood moving. Real wealth is heat. Real wealth is a place where the winter cannot find you." As they walked, the gray began to glow with a strange emerald light. The mist was thinning. Thorn reached out and took her hand, guiding her over a final slick ledge of obsidian. "The old ones called this the breath of the earth," he whispered. "The miners call it a myth. I call it home." They were walking through a grove of ancient cedars that shouldn't have been able to survive at this altitude. Their trunks were massive, wrapped in thick, vibrant ferns. Isabel realized the mist wasn't just weather, it was steam.
It rose from hidden vents in the earth, creating a self-contained ecosystem. Thorn stopped at the edge of a precipice. He didn't look at the ground. He looked straight ahead. People in Oakhaven spend their lives looking for a vein of ore to make them rich. They never realize that the richest man is the one who needs nothing from the valley. He reached into his pocket and emptied the remaining silver nuggets into his palm, and without a second thought, tossed them into the misty abyss below. "Why?" Isabel gasped. "That could have bought us anything." It already did. It bought us silence, and it bought us the chance to see the world as it was before the shovels arrived. The mist suddenly parted like a theater curtain. Below them lay a hidden basin, a lush green bowl carved into the very crown of the mountain. In the center, a series of turquoise pools bubbled with geothermal heat, and beside them stood a structure that defied everything Isabel knew about the beggar she had married.
Isabel stood at the edge of the basin, her breath stolen by a sight that defied the laws of the frontier. This was the Eyrie. It was a secret garden cradled in the stone palms of the great ridge. Below them, the turquoise pools weren't just water. They were calderas, natural springs heated by the earth's internal furnace. The steam rose in gentle plumes, keeping the valley at a perpetual balmy spring temperature, while the peaks above remained frozen in white. "It's an oasis," Isabel whispered, her voice trembling. "A kingdom in the sky." And the center of the basin stood a lodge unlike any cabin in Oakhaven. It was built from sun-bleached cedar logs, fitted together with the precision of a watchmaker. The roof was pitched steep to shed the heavy mountain snows, and wide windows of hand-blown glass caught the shifting light of the clouds. This wasn't the shack of a beggar. It was a sanctuary of engineering and intent. "My father found this place when the first gold rush turned the valleys into mud," Thorn said, leading her down a winding stone path. "He was a geologist who realized that the Earth's heat was more valuable than the gold in its veins. He spent 20 years building this. He taught me that true independence isn't found in a bank, it's found in a closed loop." This was the educational heart of Thorn's world, sustainability. He showed Isabel the heat exchange. Beneath the lodge, he had channeled the runoff from the hot springs through a series of hollowed-out stone pipes. The rising heat warmed the floors and the air, allowing them to live in comfort without burning a forest's worth of wood. Near the lodge, a terrace of dark, rich soil was bursting with life. There were hardy greens, mountain potatoes, and even a small grove of stunted but fruit-bearing trees. The volcanic ash makes the soil incredibly fertile, and the steam creates a microclimate. We're at 10,000 feet, and yet we can grow a harvest that would die in Oakhaven's frost. As they reached the heavy oak door of the lodge, Isabel realized why Thorn lived as a pariah in town. If the world knew of this place, of its warmth, its water, and its safety, the miners would swarm the peaks like locusts. They would strip the cedar, pollute the springs, and turn this peace into a commodity. Thorn opened the door. Inside, the air smelled of beeswax and dried herbs. Shelves of leather-bound books lined the walls, and soft furs covered the chairs. It was a palace of the mind and the body. "You called me the poorest man in the town, and by their measure I was. But I didn't buy your freedom with silver, Isabel. I bought it so you could help me guard the only thing left that hasn't been sold." Isabel walked to the window. She could see the clouds churning below them like a gray sea. She was no longer a spinster or a servant. She was the co-guardian of a world the rest of the West didn't even know existed. But as she looked out, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A thin trail of black smoke rising from the pass they had just crossed. The black smoke was a jagged scar against the pure white of the peaks. Thorn's face hardened, the peace of the Eyrie instantly replaced by the sharp instincts of a protector.
He grabbed a pair of brass field glasses from a cedar table. "Prospectors," he muttered, his voice dropping to a low vibrato. "They aren't looking for us. They're looking for the source of that silver nugget I gave your uncle. Greed is a compass that always points toward trouble." Through the lenses, they saw a small group of men huddled near the razor's edge. They were ill-equipped, shivering in thin canvas coats, trying to light a fire with wet wood. They were experiencing the early stages of hypothermia, a condition where the body's core temperature drops below 95 degrees, causing the mind to become clouded and the limbs to grow heavy. They won't survive the night, Isabel realized. The wind was picking up, and the temperature was beginning to plummet. Thorne looked at his warm, glowing home, then back at the dying fire on the ridge. The town calls them enterprising men, but they are children in a cathedral they don't understand. If we let them freeze, we are no better than the mountains. If we show them the way in, the Eyrie dies. This was the ultimate test of their new life. Wealth, as Thorne had taught her, wasn't just about what you possessed, it was about the power to choose. They decided on a middle path, the path of the secret provider. They spent the next hour preparing survival caches. Thorne showed Isabel how to pack high-calorie pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries, into waterproof skins. They added small bundles of dry kindling treated with resin, which would catch fire even in a gale. "We won't bring them here," Thorne explained as they began the descent back toward the mist. "We will lead them to the lower caves. We will give them the tools to save themselves without giving them the map to our sanctuary." As they moved through the steam-filled trees, Isabel felt a profound shift in her soul. A week ago she was being auctioned for her labor. Now she was a silent benefactor, a shadow moving through the clouds to save the very people who had looked down on her. They reached the men under the cover of the white ghost fog. Moving like ghosts, Thorne and Isabel left the supplies just yards from the prospectors' camp, making enough noise to draw their attention, but staying hidden in the gray. From the safety of a high ledge, they watched as the men found the dry wood and the food. The prospectors shouted in confusion, looking around for their savior, but all they saw was the swirling mist and the indifferent stone. "They'll think it was a miracle," Isabel whispered. "Let them," Thorne replied. "A miracle is just a name people give to the kindness of strangers they didn't bother to notice." As they turned back toward the hidden warmth of their lodge, Isabel realized she had never felt richer. She didn't have a diamond on her finger or a silk dress in her trunk. She had the heat of the earth beneath her feet and the strength to protect those who didn't even know she existed.
The winter of 1874 became the harshest in Oakhaven's memory, but inside the Eyrie, the seasons seemed to hold their breath. The black smoke of the prospectors had long since vanished. They had retreated to the valley, telling tall tales of ghosts in the mist who fed the hungry. No one returned to the high peaks. The mountain had protected its own. Inside the cedar lodge, the hearth glowed with a steady geothermal hum. Isabel sat by the window, but she wasn't looking for intruders anymore. She was watching the way the steam from the turquoise pools met the falling snow, creating a shimmering veil of crystals. She realized that her life had become a series of microclimates, pockets of warmth and safety she had helped create. "The town thinks we are lost," she said, looking at Thorne. He was sitting at the heavy oak table, carving a new set of bowls from a fallen burl of cedar. "They think the beggar and the spinster were swallowed by the ridge." Thorne looked up, a rare, soft smile touching his weathered face. "Let 'em believe it. Silence is the best fence ever built." He stood and walked over to her, handing her a small wooden pendant he had been working on. It wasn't shaped like a coin or a gem. It was carved in the likeness of a yellow avalanche lily, the plant that had saved her on their first day.
It was a symbol of resilience, the biological ability to thrive in the harshest conditions. "You aren't just a guest here, Isabel," Thorn said quietly. "This kingdom was a house when I was alone. With you, it's a home." They were no longer two strangers tied together by a debt. They were a family of the high crags. They had learned the greatest lesson of the Old West, that wealth isn't what you can take from the earth, but how well you can live in harmony with it. As the sun set, casting a deep gold across the lost kingdom, Isabel leaned her head on Thorn's shoulder. Below them, the world was still chasing shadows and digging for dust. But up here, above the eagles and inside the clouds, they had everything they needed. They had the warmth of the earth, the wisdom of the wild, and most importantly, each other. The beggar had led her to a kingdom, and together they would keep its secret forever.
The mountains have a way of revealing who we truly are when the noise of the world fades away. Thorn and Isabel found a wealth that no bank could hold, and I hope their story reminded you that sometimes the things the world calls poor are actually the richest treasures of all. If you enjoyed this journey into the Erie, please hit the like button and share this video with someone who loves the spirit of the Old West. Don't forget to subscribe to Rescued by the Rich and click the bell icon so you never miss a tale of redemption. I'd love to hear from you. What part of Thorn's mountain wisdom resonated with you the most? Let me know in the comments below. For more stories of survival and love, check out our featured playlist on the screen now. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and may you find your own kingdom in the clouds. Be well.